All right, welcome back to Hannity, a red state, blue state debate. By mutual agreement, both candidates had other commitments, and they realized afterwards they couldn't stay longer, but we appreciate them all being here tonight. Okay, what did you think about it? Was there a winner, loser, winners, losers? You get to react. Anyway, here joining us, co-host of The Five and former Democratic Congressman Harold Ford Jr., along with the co-host of Outnumbered, Kayleigh McEnany, Fox News contributor Ari Fleischer. Kayleigh, we start with you. That was a very low-energy debate. That's my first observation.
And mine was the opposite. I know you're being facetious. What an edifying, constructive, smart hour with fact-based questions. Sean, one of the best events I've seen in a very long time, so well done on your part. Look, in press, as when I was press secretary, Ari knows this, you ask yourself, do you have a facts problem or do you have a messaging problem? And tonight what you saw was a facts problem for Gavin Newsom. You put up the numbers. They were undeniable. You sourced them. And what the public saw was the sharpest, best messenger in the Democrat Party. I maintain that's Gavin Newsom, unable to message the rotting pile of facts before him, both in the state of California and nationally for Joe Biden. DeSantis had some really strong moments, particularly when he said, look, I talked to a guy who said, I love the employment down here. I love the wages down here. I love the state of Florida, how safe it is. Oh, by the way, that was your father-in-law, Gavin Newsom, also pulling out the map of the feces in San Francisco, another strong and powerful moment. So I think the clear winner, Ron DeSantis, in a nearly impossible task for Gavin Newsom.
Let's get your take, Ari Fleischer.
Well, I think watching this, you just realize Democrats are from Mars and Republicans are from Venus. I mean, they speak totally different languages. Ron DeSantis' language was one of economics, gasoline, $6, $7 a gallon, the lockdowns in California. It was very practical, very focused on people's daily lives, the rise in cost of living. If you listen to Gavin Newsom, his whole message was identity politics, which is the language of the Democrats. I don't like the way you talk about migrants. We have to fight for women. Everything he says is about a group, an ethnic group, a chunk of Americans. It's not about America. And that's the language that Democrats respond to. So you really have two different approaches for what America needs. I will say this, Gavin Newsom is much more articulate, fast on his feet, and sharper than Joe Biden. And if I'm a Democrat looking at the presidential race, even if I dismiss Ron DeSantis, I have to still worry about Joe Biden. And that's a difference in just Biden's age, Sean, as you pointed that out. The final thing I'll say about DeSantis, I don't think that he closed the gap with Donald Trump tonight. It was a nice night for him, and he did well, and he had the facts on his side. But when you look at the purpose of him being there, which is to win a presidential race, I just don't think he closed the gap.
Actually, it was separate from that. I could just tell you in the discussion leading up to this that this was really state versus state. And although clearly I think Gavin at times wanted to talk more presidential politics, Harold Ford Jr., your take.
So first off, congrats, Sean. I thought you did a great job, and you framed this thing the right way, a state versus a state. And both of these candidates who are governors were very passionate, patriotic. They defended their records. I think Kayleigh and Mr. Fleischer are right. I think what Ari said at the end there is probably most useful, and maybe the utility level is highest. Who did best for their parties tonight? I think one of the things, and Kayleigh said at the outset, there's no doubt that Gavin Newsom will be the most important, the most forceful and articulate advocate on behalf of Democrats in this 2024 election. And Governor DeSantis, I think, displayed one of the things that Republicans are going to have to deal with. How do you talk about the economy? How do you talk about issues in the face of, I think, whether we like it or not, or agree or not, one of the most powerful issues in this election in 2024 is going to be this issue of reproductive rights for women. It's not going to overtake everything, but it will certainly be one of the most important issues. And I think where we are 6 months from today with regard to gas prices and inflation will probably determine more about the outcome of the presidential race than anything else. But as it relates to the state issues, Florida, California, I got to tell you, I was more impressed with Ron DeSantis than I thought I would be. I thought that Governor Newsom, who I think is one of the most effective presenters in politics, he was that tonight. But I thought that Governor DeSantis laid out very effectively his record in Florida. Was it able to do what he wanted to do on the presidential stage? Probably not. But tonight, I think he probably fared better than I thought a lot of people thought he might have fared against a guy in our party, Gavin Newsom, who I thought did well tonight, but I thought Governor DeSantis did a pretty good job tonight as well, too, defending his state and his record.
What did you think, Kayleigh, about the answer when I quoted LBJ in terms of Gavin? There's a lot of suspicion, a lot of people around the country. Polls are bearing this out now more than ever, that people are seeing Joe Biden as weak and frail and in cognitive decline. That was not something that Gavin Newsom wanted to admit. But when you bring up the issue of whether or not, if his party came to him, whether he's been very clear in all three interviews that I've had with him, tonight being a debate, obviously I'm moderating, but that he thinks that it would be the Vice President Harris, and not him up next. If you say it that often, you have to take somebody at their word, don't you?
Well, as a political figure, there are certain things you have to say. This is why every single person, probably in all of time, who has run for president says, oh, no, it's not my time. I'm not thinking of that right now. I'm focusing on my state, my city, et cetera. And then several of them go on to run for president. There are certain things that you must say. Gavin Newsom tonight must have said over and over again, it's Joe Biden, and then given that head nod to Kamala Harris. But what I look at are what were the words of Gavin Newsom leading into the midterm elections. Days before the midterm elections, he talked about his fundamental grievances with his party. They're unable to message. It was someone, by his words, that seemed to be clearly posturing in the event of a red wave, either running himself and taking on Joe Biden or being the second alternative waiting in the wings. Then the red wave didn't happen. It crashed and burned. And all of a sudden, Gavin Newsom kissed the ring and says, yes, it's you, Joe Biden. You had a very good midterm election. I think he's waiting in the wings. He can't get on the ballot because we've missed several ballot deadlines. But I think he's waiting in the event that something goes wrong at the Democratic Party, at the Democratic National Convention, where they actually name the nominee. He's waiting there. That's the only reason that you do a debate like what we saw tonight, going toe-to-toe with someone who is running himself to be the GOP nominee.
Exit, quick grade. That's it. Ari, we'll start with you. How would you grade Governor DeSantis tonight, and what grade would you give Gavin Newsom tonight?
I'd give DeSantis a B+ in the way he handled the facts. I would give him a B- because he hardly ever looked Gavin Newsom in the eye. And if you're going to be strong, you need to look your opponent in the eye. He did it occasionally. You need to do it always. I would give Newsom a D, just in terms of his mangling of the facts, his fabricating, his making things up. In terms of being glib, yeah, I'd give him an A. I don't think I've ever seen a guy stand in the on-deck circle, putting pine tar on his bat, studying the pitcher and swinging the bat, all the while denying that he's going to step up to the plate. That's what Gavin Newsom was tonight.
Harold Ford Jr., grades.
I give them both B+. I thought they did what they had to do tonight to try to advance where they were. I do think that if you're Governor Haley, if you're thinking about the presidential race tonight, Governor Haley probably is feeling fine tonight, and I think in the presidential race, former President Trump is probably feeling much better. And if you're President Biden, you better sign Governor Newsom up to be your chief surrogate in this presidential race.
Kayleigh, you get the last word. Grades.
DeSantis gets an A. He was the clear runaway winner. However, Gavin Newsom, given the bad pile of facts, gets a C. He's a sharp messenger. Watch out. That guy's coming. He's a rising star in the party.
All right. Thank all three. I appreciate it. Thanks for being with us. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.